She served me divorce papers in front of everyone at my retirement party. Co-workers, friends, even my old supervisor who flew in from out of state. One minute I was holding a glass, smiling for photos, letting them clap me on the back after 32 years of work. The next minute my wife, Sloan Mercer, stepped up beside the cake, tapped her spoon against the glass, and said she had one last surprise. People laughed, expecting a speech or a sentimental gift. Instead, she handed me a thick envelope and told me to open it. I did, because I trusted her. Then I saw the words that turned my stomach cold. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Everyone went quiet. Someone awkwardly coughed. I felt my face burn as Sloan smiled like she'd just won a game nobody else knew they were playing. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Darius Kellen, and I've never been the dramatic type. I spent decades in the same industry, built a reputation for being steady, dependable, and fair. I was the guy who trained people, covered shifts, fixed problems without making a spectacle. That night, I didn't yell. I didn't throw the papers. I didn't beg her to stop. I stood there in a room full of people who suddenly didn't know where to look, and I asked Sloan in a low voice, "Is this real?" She nodded and said, "It's time, Darius. I'm done pretending." The humiliation wasn't just public. It was deliberate. Sloan had picked the one night when my guard was down, when I was surrounded by the people who respected me, when I was being celebrated. She wanted the memory stained. She wanted me small. And she wanted witnesses. That night ended with my co-workers pretending they had somewhere else to be. My closest friend from work, Brennan Holt, walked me to my car without saying much, like words would make it worse. I drove home alone, papers on the passenger seat like a weight. When I opened the front door, Sloan had already packed a suitcase. She didn't look guilty. She looked relieved. I didn't understand why she'd do it that way. Not yet. But I was about to learn that the divorce papers weren't the first betrayal, just the one she chose to perform. She served me divorce papers. I didn't start out in front of everyone at my retirement party. We met in our late 20s when life still felt like a friends. Even my old supervisor, stylish, flew in and always 2 steps ahead in conversations. 1 minute I was holding a glass, people gravitated smiling for photos. I liked that, letting them clap the way she could hold a room after 32 years. The way she made ordinary moments. The next minute, my wife, Sloan Mercer, over time stepped up beside the cake, began to realize that Sloan didn't just like attention, and said she had one last surprise. And when she didn't get it, people laughed. She punished the people closest to her by withdrawing warmth like it was currency. Instead, she handed me a thick envelope. I worked long hours while she managed our social life. I did, handled family gatherings. Then I saw the words that turned my stomach cold. I never petitioned for dissolution. Never gambled. Never everyone went quiet. My biggest flaw was that I assumed showing up. I felt my face burn as Sloan smiled, like she just won a silent resentment building behind her smiles. Stick with me while I share my story. How I never understood what she gave up. Don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button. How she felt invisible. Dropping a like. If I defended myself, she called it dismissive. My name is Darius Kellen. If I apologized, and I've never been the dramatic type. Nothing I did seemed to count. I spent decades in the same industry. What she really wanted was control. Built a reputation for being steady, dependable. The closer I got to retirement, I was the guy who trained people. It wasn't a gradual drift. Fixed problems. It was like she started treating the end of my career. That night, I didn't yell. As the end of her patience. I didn't throw the papers. She grew sharper. I didn't beg her to stop. More theatrical. I stood there in a room full of people who suddenly didn't know where to look. She stopped talking about our future, and I asked and started talking about her freedom. Is this real? The word finally began. She nodded and said, "It's time. Finally, I can do what I want. I'm done pretending. Finally, I won't have to schedule around you." Humiliation wasn't just public. She framed it like jokes. But the tone didn't match the one night when my guard was down. I kept trying to reconnect. When I was surrounded by the people who respected me. She accepted them like they were compensation. She wanted the memory she believed I owed. She wanted me small. Her affection felt conditional. And she wanted witnesses, like a reward for good behavior. That night ended with my coworkers. Meanwhile, she became obsessed with how things looked to other people. My closest friend from work, she wanted the retirement party big. Walked me to my car without saying much. She wanted to be seen as the supportive wife. I drove home alone, hardworking man. Papers on the passenger seat like a weight, because I wanted to believe my marriage was still something. Sloan had already packed a suitcase. Looking back, she didn't look guilty. The retirement party wasn't planned as a tribute to me. I didn't understand why she'd do it that way. Sloan didn't want a private exit, but I was about to learn that the divorce papers, one where she controlled the narrative, the just the one she chose to perform. If she was leaving, she wanted to leave with power. By the time I noticed something was seriously wrong, she was already planning the moment she'd turn my proudest night into my most humiliating one. The next morning, I woke up in the guest room because I couldn't stand being in our bed. The house felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. Sloan moved around the kitchen calmly, making coffee, humming under her breath. It was like she'd wiped the night before from her mind while it replayed on loop in mine. When I asked why she did it that way, why in front of everyone, she said something that made my hands go numb around the mug. I needed them to see, she said. I needed people to know you're not the hero you pretend to be. That was the first time I realized she wasn't just leaving me. She was preparing to rewrite me. She started talking fast, stacking complaints like bricks. She claimed I was emotionally absent, that I controlled money, that I made her feel trapped. Some of it was true in tiny ways every long marriage collects like dust. But she spoke with the confidence of someone rehearsed, like she'd been practicing her story in her head for months. Then she slipped and revealed the real motive. She wanted the divorce to move quickly. She wanted no drama, no delays, and no fighting. But she also wanted to walk away with the house and a generous settlement. She said she deserved it for supporting my career. She wanted me to sign before I talked to anyone who would tell me to slow down. When I refused to sign immediately, her calm cracked. She accused me of wanting revenge. The irony nearly made me laugh, because she was the one who made it public, the one who turned my retirement into a courtroom exhibit. She stormed out, and a few hours later, I found out she'd already consulted an attorney. She wasn't improvising. She was executing. What Sloane didn't anticipate was that public humiliation doesn't just hurt. It sharpens you. It forces you to look at your life without the comforting blur of denial. That night, I called Brennan Holt. I didn't ask for comfort. I asked a single question. Did you notice anything about her lately? Anything I should have seen? Brennan hesitated. Then he said, Darius. I didn't want to say anything. But there's been talk. Not gossip, patterns. She's been meeting someone. Not from work. From somewhere else. My stomach dropped, but the feeling wasn't shock. It was recognition, like a missing puzzle piece snapping into place. The sudden coldness. The obsession with image. The urgency to control the divorce. The need to crush me publicly before I could ask questions. That's when I realized the papers weren't an ending. They were a cover. The next morning, Sloane right away. I woke up in the guest room. That would have been emotional, loud, and satisfying for 5 minutes. The house felt unfamiliar, but I wasn't looking for 5 someone else. I was looking for a clean moved around the kitchen calmly, so I did what I'd done my whole career, humming under her breath. I gathered facts. It was like she'd wiped the night before from her mind while it replayed on loop. First, I reviewed our finances. When I asked why she did it that way, every withdrawal, why in front of every unexplained charge, she said something that made my hands go numb. I found patterns. Smaller amounts that wouldn't trigger alarms. I needed people to know you're not the hero you pretend to be. Weekend hotel deposits. That was the first time I realized she wasn't just leaving me. Nothing that screamed fair in plain English. She started to show someone had been living a second life on my dime. She claimed I was emotionally absent, made copies, that I controlled money, I created a folder, that I made her feel trapped. Then I visited an attorney, in tiny Marla Quinn, weighs every long marriage and a voice that didn't rise when mine did. But she spoke with the confidence. She listened to my story without flinching, like she'd been practicing her story. When I described the retirement party humiliation, she didn't call it petty. Revealed the real motive. She called it strategic. She wanted the divorce to move quickly. She explained that public embarrassment. She wanted no drama to pressure someone into signing, no fighting. Especially, but she also wanted to walk away with the house. And Marla told me not to move out. She said she deserved it for supporting me, not to argue in writing. She wanted me to sign before I talked to anyone who would tell me to slow down. You need to protect what you built. When I refused to sign immediately, then she asked a question that changed everything. She accused me of wanting revenge. Do you think she expects you to fund her exit? The irony nearly made me laugh. That's when the real anger hit me. She was the one who made it public, but cold. The one who turned my retirement into a Sloane didn't just want to leave. She stormed out. She wanted to leave comfortably. A few hours later, funded by the same stability, I found out she'd already consulted an attorney. She wanted to shame me into compliance and call it empowerment. Over the next few weeks, Sloane played two public humiliation in public. Just hurt. She acted like the brave wife, finally choosing herself. It forces you to look at your life in private. The comforting blur of denial. She tried to keep a thread attached to my guilt. That night, I called Brennan Holt. She cried and threatened. I didn't apologize, then accuse. I asked a single question. She told me if I fought her, did you notice anything about her kind of man I really was? Anything I should have seen. She didn't realize Brennan was showing her hand. Then he said, she cared more about the story. I didn't want to say anything. Meanwhile, I stayed calm. Not gossip patterns. I let her believe I was confused and broken, not from work. And while she performed, somewhere else, prepared. My stomach secured my retirement, but the feeling wasn't shock. I adjusted beneficiaries. It was recognition, like a missing documented piece everything the legal way. I did not retaliate emotionally. The obsession with I didn't need to. The urgency in the background, to control the real payback was forming. The need to crush me publicly, one that would land 3 months after that party. That's when I realized finally realized public humiliation. They were a cover. Doesn't make you powerful, unless the other person stays weak. Once I stopped reacting emotionally, the picture became clearer. Sloane didn't realize it, but her confidence gave her away. She stopped hiding small details because she assumed I was already defeated. She'd leave the house for appointments, without explaining where or why. She stopped asking my schedule, which she had monitored for years. It wasn't freedom, it was calculation. She believed the divorce papers and public embarrassment had already broken my spine. Through Brennan, I learned the man's name, Evan Calder. Not a co-worker. Not a friend of the family. Someone she met through a private professional circle tied to the kind of lifestyle she'd been craving: status, flexibility, attention. Evan was younger, ambitious, and unencumbered by responsibility. He didn't know the real cost of the comfort Sloane enjoyed. He only saw the polished version she curated. What hit hardest wasn't the affair itself. It was the timeline. The colder she'd grown toward me lined up perfectly with her increased time away from home. The finally comments. The rehearsed dissatisfaction. She hadn't fallen out of love and then cheated. She cheated, then rewrote the marriage to justify it. I didn't confront her. I let her believe she was winning. Every conversation she tried to start about moving forward amicably, I kept neutral and short. The less I reacted, the more careless she became. She talked freely about future plans, travel, downsizing, starting fresh. She spoke as if my role in her life had already been reduced to a funding source she was in the process of closing. That's when I realized something important. Sloane wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing access to my stability, my resources, and my reputation. And she was betting everything on the assumption that I wouldn't fight back. She was wrong. Once I stopped reacting emotionally, the picture became clear. She explained that my retirement benefits, didn't realize pension structure, confidence, and long-term accounts weren't just assets. She stopped hiding small details because she assumed I was already she'd automatically be entitled. She'd leave the house for appointments. She hadn't read closely without explaining where. She hadn't anticipated resistance. She stopped asking my schedule. She counted on my guilt she had monitored for years. We filed responses instead of calculation. She documented divorce papers and public embarrassment had already the financial records told a story without emotion. I learned the man's name, unexplained Evan spending, Calder, marital not funds, a co-worker, supporting an outside not a friend of the family, attempts to someone rush she met through a private professional circle. Marla didn't smile when lifestyle she'd been craving. She simply nodded status, and said, flexibility, this changes attention. Evan was younger, Sloane grew ambitious, and unencumbered by responsibility. She pressed me to be reasonable. He didn't know the real dragging things out would only hurt everyone. He only saw the polished version she curated. It would delay her exit. What hit hardest wasn't the affair she didn't want examined. It was the timeline. Every time I didn't comply, the colder she'd grown toward me lined up perfectly with her told mutual acquaintances that I was being difficult. The finally comments. That retirement had the rehearsed dissatisfaction. That I was bitter. She hadn't fallen out of love. She was setting the stage to paint herself as the victim of a stubborn man who couldn't justify it. I didn't thought public perception would. I let her believe she was winning. What she didn't know was that I wasn't she tried to start about anymore. Moving forward, I was operating on paper. I kept neutral and paper doesn't care about charm. The less I reacted, the legal process forced disclosures she hadn't prepared. She talked freely about future Evan's plans, involvement, travel, downsizing, not dramatically, but undeniably. She spoke as if my role in her life had already been reduced to a funding source. Marla advised patience. She was in the process of closing. Let the process do the talking. That's when I realized something important. People reveal themselves. Sloane wasn't afraid the outcome is guaranteed. She was afraid of the end of the second month. To my stability, my resources, and my less reputation. Confident, more she brittle. Was betting everything she started on the asking questions that I wouldn't fight instead back. Of issuing demands. She was wrong. She wanted reassurance that things would work out fairly. That word, fair, sounded different coming from her now. The first real crack appeared when Sloane asked if we could talk privately, without attorneys. She framed it as closure, as respect, as something we owed each other. I agreed, but only to listen. She cried, not convincingly. She said she never meant to hurt me publicly. That emotions got the better of her. That she felt trapped and panicked. She blamed stress, timing, even the party itself. She didn't mention Evan. She didn't mention money. She spoke like someone testing which version of reality might still stick. When I didn't reassure her, she grew frustrated. She accused me of punishing her, of dragging things out to regain control. The irony almost impressed me. She had confused calm with weakness for so long that she didn't recognize it as resolve. I told her something simple. I'm not fighting you. I'm just not saving you. That sentence changed the air in the room. Her face tightened, not with anger but with fear. Because for the first time, she understood that I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was acting deliberately. That night, she didn't go back to the house. She stayed elsewhere. And for the first time since the retirement party, I slept through the night. By the first real crack appeared everything Sloane thought was settled talk privately, without the house she expected to keep. She framed it as under review, as respect, settlement she assumed as something we owed each other. Challenged, I agreed. The narrative only to listen, cracking under documentation, not convincingly. Evan pulled back. She said she never meant the divorce wasn't the clean break. That emotions got the better of her. He didn't
that
sign
she
up
felt
for
trapped
complexity.
And panicked.
He certainly
She
didn't
blamed
sign
stress,
up to be exposed
timing,
as part of the
even the
timeline.
party itself.
Sloane's new
beginning
beginning
started
started
looking
looking a lot
She
less
didn't mention
glamorous.
money.
She
She
reached
spoke
out
like
again,
someone testing
this
which
time not
version
with
of reality
threats or tears,
might still
but
stick.
with caution. When I didn't
She asked
reassure
if there
her,
was
she
another
grew
way to
frustrated.
resolve things.
She accused
What
me
she
of
meant
punishing
was,
her. Could she still
dragging
walk away
things out
without
to regain
consequences?
control.
The
3
irony
months
almost
after the
impressed
retirement
me.
party,
She had
the legal
confused
response
calm with
landed.
weakness for so
Terms
long that she
changed.
didn't recognize
Expectations
it as resolve.
collapsed.
I told
And
her
for the
something
first
simple.
time since she handed
I'm
me
not
those
fighting
papers
you.
in front of everyone,
I'm just not saving you.
Sloane realized
That sentence
something
changed
crucial.
the air in the room.
Public humiliation
Her face
only
tightened,
works if
not
the
with
other
anger,
person
but
panics.
with fear. And I
Because
never
for the
did.
first time, she understood that I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was acting deliberately. That night, she didn't go back to the house. She stayed elsewhere. And for the first time since the retirement party, I slept through the night. By the time the 3rd month hit, Sloane wasn't surrounded by confidence anymore. She was surrounded by silence. People who once echoed her certainty suddenly became cautious. The narrative she had built so carefully was starting to wobble, not because I challenged it publicly, but because the facts behind it didn't cooperate. When lawyers asked questions, stories had to line up. And hers didn't. She began to realize that the people she thought were on her side were only there as long as things stayed simple. Evan Calder, the man she believed would be waiting for her on the other side of the divorce, became distant. Not cruel, just pragmatic. He stopped answering immediately. He postponed plans. He asked questions she didn't want to answer. The illusion of a clean break evaporated the moment responsibility entered the picture. Sloane tried to compensate by tightening control elsewhere. She demanded updates. She asked for reassurance. She implied that my calm was manipulative, that I was playing games. What she couldn't accept was that I wasn't playing at all. I had stepped out of the emotional exchange entirely, and that made her frantic. People like Sloane didn't fear anger. They feared irrelevance. Meanwhile, the legal process continued quietly. Financial disclosures forced timelines to align. Patterns emerged without commentary. When Evan's name appeared indirectly, never accused, never dramatized, it did more damage than confrontation ever could. Sloane wasn't exposed loudly. She was exposed accurately. That accuracy isolated her. And isolation changed her posture. By the time the 3rd month hit, understood
Sloane wasn't
miscalculated,
surrounded by
wasn't in a
confidence
courtroom
anymore,
or an
she
argument.
was surrounded by silence.
It was during a routine mediation
People who once
session.
echoed her certainty
She
suddenly
expected me to
became
look
cautious.
tired.
The
Defensive,
narrative she had built so
cornered.
carefully was
Instead,
starting to wobble.
I showed up prepared,
not because
calm,
I challenged it
and
publicly,
uninterested in posturing,
but because the facts
I
behind
didn't
it didn't
interrupt.
cooperate.
I didn't flinch
When lawyers
when old
asked
accusations
questions,
were
stories
recycled.
had to line up.
I let the professionals
hers didn't.
handle it. She
At
began
one
to
point,
realize that
Sloane
the people
tried
she
to
thought
appeal
were on her
directly to
side
me.
were
She
only
said
there
something
as
about
long
how
as
this
things
wasn't
stayed
what either
simple.
of us wanted.
Evan Calder,
That we were
the man
ruining
she
something
believed
that
would
could
be
have
waiting
ended
for her on the
peacefully.
other side of the
I
divorce.
looked at her and
became
realized
distant.
she still didn't
Not
understand.
cruel, just pragmatic.
Peace wasn't the absence
He stopped
of resistance.
answering immediately.
Peace was the
He
presence of
postponed
fairness.
plans.
And
He
she had
asked
never
questions
offered
she
that.
didn't want to answer.
When the session ended,
the illusion of
she
a
followed
clean
me
break
into the hallway.
evaporated the moment
Her voice dropped.
responsibility entered
She
the
asked
picture.
quietly. Sloane
Why are
tried
you
to
doing this to
compensate
me?
by tightening
That question
control
stunned me.
elsewhere.
Not
She
because
demanded
it hurt,
updates,
but because it
she asked
revealed
for
how she
reassurance.
saw the world.
She
In
implied
her
that
mind,
my calm was
consequences were
manipulative,
acts of aggression.
that I was playing games.
Accountability was cruelty.
What she couldn't accept
My
was that I
refusal to
wasn't
collapse
playing at
had
all.
become an offense.
I had stepped out of
I
the
answered
emotional
honestly.
exchange entirely.
I'm not doing anything
and
to
that
you.
made her frantic.
I'm just not protecting
People
you
like
anymore.
Sloane didn't fear
She
anger.
stared at me like
They
she
feared
just realized the
irrelevance.
ground wasn't
Meanwhile,
solid.
the legal process continued quietly. Financial disclosures forced timelines to align. Patterns emerged without commentary. When Evan's name appeared indirectly, never accused, never dramatized, it did more damage than confrontation ever could. Sloane wasn't exposed loudly. She was exposed accurately. That accuracy isolated her. And isolation changed her posture. When the revised settlement proposal arrived, it wasn't dramatic. There were no threats. No moral lectures. Just numbers, clauses, and timelines that reflected reality, not entitlement. The house she assumed was hers? Divided. The retirement benefits she thought were automatic? Reduced significantly. The assumption that I would take the high road by sacrificing quietly? Gone. Sloane panicked. She accused her attorney of incompetence. She accused me of betrayal. She accused the process of being unfair. But fairness had nothing to do with emotion. It had everything to do with documentation. And documentation doesn't bend to charm. She reached out one last time, not as an adversary, but as someone scrambling to salvage dignity. She asked if we could adjust things privately. I declined. Not coldly. Not angrily. Simply firmly. The time for private fixes had passed the moment she chose a public spectacle.
What struck me most was how small she suddenly seemed. Not weak, but stripped of illusion. The woman who had once orchestrated my humiliation now stood facing consequences she couldn't spin.
The
When
night
the revised
before
settlement
everything
proposal
finalized,
arrived,
I sat alone in
wasn't
the
dramatic.
house that no longer
There were no
felt
threats.
hostile.
No
For the
more
first time in
lectures,
months,
just
I wasn't
numbers,
bracing for
clauses,
impact.
and timelines that
I wasn't
reflected
anticipating
reality,
the next move,
not entitlement.
The fight was over.
The house she assumed
Not
was
because I'd
hers,
won loudly,
divided,
but because I'd refused
the retirement
to lose
benefits
quietly.
she thought were automatic.
Sloan sent a message
reduced
that night.
significantly.
Not angry.
The assumption that
Not
I would take the
manipulative.
high road by
Just
sacrificing
tired.
quietly.
She said she never
Gone.
expected things
Sloan
to turn
panicked.
out this way.
She accused
That she
her
thought I
attorney
would
of
let it go.
incompetence. That
She
sentence said
accused me
everything.
of betrayal.
She had mistaken my
accused the
decency
process
for
of
being
being
unfair.
I didn't
But
reply.
fairness had nothing
3
to do
months
with
earlier,
emotion. She had
It
handed
had
me
everything
divorce
to do with
papers in front of
documentation.
everyone,
And
believing
documentation
humiliation
doesn't
would
bend
keep
to
me
charm.
compliant. She
What
reached
she
out
didn't
one
understand
last time
was that
not
humiliation
as an
can
adversary,
also sharpen
but as
resolve.
someone scrambling
It
to
can
salvage
strip away
dignity.
fear.
It
She
can
asked
teach you
if we could
exactly
adjust
how much
things
you're willing to
privately.
tolerate.
I declined.
And no more.
Not
The
coldly.
final payback
Not
wasn't
angrily.
revenge. Simply
It was
firmly.
balance.
The
And
time
it was
for
coming.
private fixes had passed the moment she chose a public spectacle. What struck me most was how small she suddenly seemed. Not weak, but stripped of illusion. The woman who had once orchestrated my humiliation now stood facing consequences she couldn't spin. The final hearing didn't feel dramatic. There were no raised voices, no speeches, no moment where anyone gasped. That was the part Sloan never anticipated. She had staged her exit like a performance, expecting the ending to feel just as theatrical. Instead, it was procedural, restrained, and unforgiving in its neutrality. The facts spoke without emotion, and that silence did more damage than anger ever could. As the terms were finalized, I watched Sloane's posture change. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't confident. She was alert, carefully alert, in the way people become when they realize they've lost control of the environment. She asked questions she should have asked months ago. She tried to renegotiate details she'd once dismissed as settled. But the moment for leverage had passed. What struck me most was how ordinary the moment felt. 3 months earlier, she'd needed an audience to feel powerful. Now, with no crowd and no stage, there was nothing left to perform. She was just another person facing consequences she didn't plan for. When it ended, she didn't look at me. Not because she was angry, but because she finally understood something she hadn't before. I wasn't broken that night at the party. I was focused. And focus outlasts spectacle every time. The final hearing didn't feel dramatic. There was no announcement, there were no raised voices, no speeches, no satisfaction I could point to in a single moment. That was the part Sloan never unfolded slowly, over weeks. She had staged her Sloan adjusted to a reality she hadn't expecting the ending to feel emotionally or financially. Instead, it was procedural, the lifestyle she expected to maintain neutrality. Plans she'd spoken about confidently became conditional, and that silence did more damage than anger ever quietly abandoned. As the terms were finalized, Evan Calder disappeared entirely once it became clear there was no easy landing. She wasn't angry anymore. He hadn't fallen for Sloan. She was alert, for the version carefully of her alert, that came without consequences. In the way people become when they realize they've lost stabilized in ways I hadn't anticipated. She asked questions she should have asked months ago. When it wasn't overshadowed. She tried to renegotiate details. I reclaimed routines, dismissed as settled. Reconnected with the moment for leverage had passed, but had stayed. What struck me most was how ordinary the moment felt, not triumphant. 3 months earlier. That's when I understood the nature of real revenge. Now, with no crowd and no stage, there was nothing left to perform. It's about removing the conditions that allowed them to hurt you. She was just another person facing consequences. Sloan lost the narrative. When it ended, she didn't look at comfort of assumption. Not because she was angry, I gained clarity, but because she finally understood something she hadn't before. I wasn't broken that night at the party. I was focused. And focus outlasts spectacle every time. Weeks after everything was finalized, Sloan reached out one last time. Not to argue. Not to accuse. She asked if we could end things on better terms. The phrasing was careful, almost respectful. She wanted closure, but on her terms. I met her briefly in a neutral place during the day. She looked different. Not defeated, just exposed. She said she never meant to hurt me publicly. That she thought she was taking control of her life. She admitted she didn't expect resistance. She expected compliance disguised as dignity. I listened without interrupting. Then I told her something simple. You didn't hurt me by leaving. You hurt me by trying to erase me. That was the truth she'd avoided. The divorce wasn't the betrayal. The spectacle was. She didn't argue. She just nodded. For the first time, there was no angle left to play. We parted without promises. Without reconciliation. Without hostility. And I realized I didn't feel anything sharp anymore. Not anger, not sadness. Just distance. Healthy, irreversible distance.
Looking
after
back,
everything was finalized,
I understand now why
Sloane
reached out
my
one
retirement
last
party.
time.
She
Not
wanted to
argue,
control the ending
not to
while
accuse.
rewriting the past.
She asked if we could
She wanted
end
to
things
walk
on
away
better
looking
terms.
powerful.
The phrasing
Even if
was
it meant
careful,
reducing me
almost
to a prop in her
respectful.
story.
She wanted closure,
What she didn't
but on her
understand
terms.
was that public
I
humiliation
met her briefly
only
in a
works
neutral
if
place
the person
during the
receiving
day.
it accepts
She
the
looked
role
different.
assigned to them.
Not defeated,
I didn't.
just exposed.
The real lesson
She
wasn't
said she
about
never meant
revenge.
to hurt me publicly.
It was about restraint.
That she thought she was
about
taking
refusing
control
to
of her
panic.
life.
About
She
letting
admitted
people
she didn't
reveal
expect
themselves when they
resistance.
think you're too weak
She
to
expected
respond.
compliance disguised
3
as
months after
dignity.
that party, I listened
Sloane
without
learned that
interrupting.
dignity isn't loud.
Then I told her
and
something
strength
simple.
doesn't need witnesses.
You didn't hurt me by
Retirement was supposed to
hurt me
mark
by
the
trying
end
to
of my
erase
working
me.
life.
That was the
Instead,
truth she'd avoided.
it marked the beginning
The
of
divorce
something
wasn't
far
the
more
betrayal.
valuable. The spectacle
Self-respect
was.
without negotiation.
She didn't argue.
And
She
that was
just
the
nodded.
payback she never
For
saw
the first
coming.
time, there was no angle left to play. We parted without promises, without reconciliation, without hostility. And I realized I didn't feel anything sharp anymore. Not anger, not sadness. Just distance. Healthy, irreversible distance.